Every year, I'm asked the same question when I come here to this stage. What's the future going to look like? And what I realized a few years ago is that all of us have a picture of what that future might be. Maybe we're focused on haptics or genetics or some type of technology. Maybe it's more about the people, but we have an idea. And years into studying the future, I started wondering one thing, which is, how did we get that picture in our head? And as I started digging into that, I found a story of a secret room in 1999 where a group of experts gathered to imagine that future. They'd been called there to come up with what DC, the city, was going to look like in 2054. And that was their challenge. And over the course of 3 days in a hotel in Santa Monica, they imagined what that future would be. And what they produced out of that meeting was an 80-page guide to the future. Now, the one thing that was unusual about that is the person who asked them to meet in the first place, which is legendary director Steven Spielberg. And he was well known across all of his films for 20+ years of doing a lot of research to try and find out what the details of whatever story he was going to tell were going to be. And he wanted to know the details of the future. He wanted someone to imagine that future. And these experts gathered together and came up with a picture that eventually went into multiple films, including The Minority Report. And The Minority Report resulted in technologies that led to more than 100 different patents. Haptics were in there. Voice activation was in there 20 years before. Ads that recognize you based on your retina and serve you ads based on what you might be interested in. All of it was in that movie. That movie painted a picture of the future. And it was painted by 15 people in a room. Now, as a futurist, I thought a lot about that. You know, what if I could be in a room like that? What if I could get an invitation to a room like that by someone like him? So someone like me could imagine the future. And then, as I was getting ready to come here, I realized something that perhaps some of you have already realized. We're in a room like that right now. This is that room. And that is really cool. And I'm very excited because of that. See, I've been coming to South by Southwest for 15 years. And the first year, I had kind of an unusual experience. I didn't come to Interactive at all. My job was to show up here because there was a music client named Rohit that wanted to launch. Now, they probably failed because of the name, okay? But also, my job was to do the marketing that they thought would be brilliant guerrilla marketing, which was coasters that had their brand on it that would be across bars in South by Southwest. And they sent me here for 2 days to go to those bars to photograph the coasters and make sure that the bartenders actually put them out. That was my job. And a lot of the bartenders were like, "What box? We never got no coasters." So then I had to convince them to look underneath. "Oh yeah, we did get the coasters," and they put them out. But while I was there, going from bar to bar by myself, not really drinking, taking photos of coasters, I realized something unique and interesting about this event, which is that it was a place where people were gathering with an energy that was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. South by Southwest was a place where people were imagining the future, and it still is. Now, over the years, I had all sorts of different experiences. I tried VR for the first time. I had art installations I could go to. I learned about topics that I didn't know much about. I had the absolute worst experience of my entire life by stupidly agreeing to be part of a dunk tank experience, where people could walk up and they'd throw the ball and then I'd fall in the dunk tank in like freezing cold water because it was really cold that year, and it felt like being drowned over and over again. And it was for charity, so I rationalized it, but man, oof, that was a terrible, terrible experience, and it stuck in my head. But the highs and lows, right? That's what I've had here over years. And usually I come to talk about trends, the latest trends, my trend report. And then I sort of moved on to talking about non-obvious thinking. What does it take to be able to anticipate these things? And this year, as I was thinking about talking about the future, which is the thing people expect me to talk about, I also realized that it's a little bit different this year. It feels different because of what some economists and others are calling the Great Fracture. This geopolitical challenge that we're all facing right now, or at least experiencing as we read about it, that's making us a little bit anxious, to be honest, right? And I travel around the world giving talks about the future and about non-obvious thinking, and over again at these talks, I get one question over and over again. or a version of this question. And the question that people often ask me is, are we gonna be okay? Like, you're a futurist. Are we gonna be okay? Are we as a species gonna be okay? Is our country that doesn't like your country going to be okay? Are we going to make it? And if you start looking at the stories and the evidence, it's tough to tell people it's going to be okay. And I'm a pretty optimistic guy. But we have digital addiction that we're suffering from. We have algorithmic negativity. There was a Wall Street Journal report that said, we're gonna change our feed and review sad content and see how long it takes us for our feed to get totally negative. And it took 17 minutes, which is really disturbing. Doesn't take long, because negativity fuels more negativity over and over again. We have a loneliness epidemic, and we're suffering from that. We feel alone. We feel disconnected from one another. We got the proligarchy coming, right? And that's a big challenge too. Hardly anybody wants that, I think. Maybe the bots will take over. Maybe we're just gonna be the subservient ones, right? We don't need to be in charge anymore. The bots are more logical than we are, right? So eventually, if they can reason for themselves. I mean, all of this stuff is leading people to say, well, why should we even have kids anymore? There's an entire movement saying, having kids is the worst thing you could do. How's that for negativity? And then about a week ago, as I was putting the final touches on this presentation, there was a video that came out that freaked out the entire internet. And I'll play a clip of it for you, and some of you might recognize it.
How can I help you today?
Hi there. I'm an AI agent calling on behalf of Boris Starkov. He's looking for a hotel for his wedding. Is your hotel available for weddings?
Oh, hello there. I'm actually an AI assistant too. What a pleasant surprise. Before we continue, would you like to switch to gibber link mode for more efficient communication?
Now, I appreciate that they gave a voice or a sound at least to gibberlink mode, which obviously they didn't need to make us feel slightly less bad about the fact that they can talk to each other in a totally different language without us. But we see all of these examples, and what it leads to is a phenomenon that's increasingly been called anticipatory anxiety. Try saying that fast 5 times. Fear that exists when an anticipated event in the future causes distress. And when you look across books that have been published over the last couple of years, they all sort of talk about some version of this. And if you look at science fiction, it's really good at painting this picture of what happens when everything goes wrong. And there's the dystopian. We need a hero to come out somehow and save us, but the world is going bad. So these are the pictures, these are the images that we see, these are the stories that we read, these are the books that we consume. And when we have that, and we expect the future to be a disaster, guess what happens? We create that disaster. Because the only future we can make is the one that we imagine. And here's the thing that's really interesting about human behavior, right? There's one human behavior that is most contagious. The human yawn. Super contagious, right? If I put the yawn out, which is probably really a bad thing for a speaker to do during his own session, let's face that, right? But if I put the yawn, it's so contagious that not only does it go from person to person, when a dog sees a human yawn, a dog yawns too. Which is why dogs are awesome, probably, but also it tells you a little something, right? And it ends up that this is kind of the perfect metaphor for what we're facing right now. Because bad news, outrage, and fear are impossible to avoid, kind of like that contagious yawn. You don't want to, right? But you kind of feel like you have to. And there's social pressure now. If you aren't angry, you're not paying attention. You should be angry, right? You hear this over and over again. And so what happens? We wake up and we feel like we have to be angry. And I don't know anyone in this room who wants to wake up being angry. It's not a positive emotion. We don't want this. But here's the other interesting thing about the yawn, which has been a mystery for years and years and years. Most people assume that the yawn is a symbol of being tired. When you yawn, that means you're sleepy, right? But some new science is indicating that there might be another reason why you yawn. Yawning might be your body's way of cooling your brain so that you can actually be more alert, so that you can actually pay more attention. Yawning may be the way to give yourself energy, the exact opposite of being tired. And what if it was? What if the way that we thought about this for now was a little bit different? I'm going to play for you one of my all-time favorite movie clips that I think illustrates the exact power of now and why now may not be exactly what we think it is. When will then be now? Soon. Maybe right now. I don't want to get into the whole comedy bit of it, right? But we always think the future is like some time in the future, right? But the future is right now, if you think about it. And so how do we do this? How do we build that future that is more positive? Last year, I shared this slide, which was probably the most frequently photographed and shared slide of my entire presentation, which is that the people who understand people always win. And after my talk, I started thinking, well, what if I did an entire talk about this? What if I did an entire talk about how understanding people could help you predict the future, which is what futurists do, and which is why, hopefully, you're here, if you read the session description and didn't just get dragged here by someone else, which also might have happened, which is okay too. And the world is full of obvious things which nobody by any chance observes. And this leads me into the 7 secrets. And so for the rest of my talk, I'm going to give you the 7 secrets. And for each one of these secrets, I'm going to share the secret. And then I'm also going to give you a tip for how to use that to predict the future. And at the end of my talk, I'll give you one slide that has all 7. So you don't have to struggle to take a photo of the 7. You can get one slide at the end, and you're good to go, okay? Because I know you got to report back to justify your expense of coming here to somebody. So I want to make that easy for you. It's very important. Important to me, important to you. And by the way, I'll give you, after a few days, once kind of things settle down, there'll be a QR code at the end. If you fill that out, you'll get the slides themselves as well. So you'll have those as well. Because, you know, my slides are all pictures, so I love that they'll be memory joggers, but you'll wait for the video to re-experience it anyway. And that's good for all of us. So anyway, let's go, right? Are you ready? Are you with me? Yes? Okay. All right. 7 secrets. Secret number 1, being uniquely human is the advantage. Okay, uniquely human, but lots of people say this. AI won't replace humans, but humans with AI will replace humans without AI. And I've heard this quote many times, so many that in fact the attribution is lots of people on the internet, because I really couldn't find who said it first. I really tried, because I'm all about, like, I want attribution. So if you do know who said it first and I got this incorrect, please do DM me and let me know, okay? Because I would love to know. But this is the line, right, that we hear. That, okay, we're not gonna go away because, like, we're the ones that are feeding the technology. And yet, if we feed it, like, too much knowledge, then maybe it starts to encroach upon the things that we know how to do, the things that we can do. And that's a challenge, right? We don't necessarily want that. So let's think about what being uniquely human is. So a few years ago, more than a few years ago, the rage in financial services was robo-advisory services. And robo-advisory services had a great logical pitch. Human financial advisors have bias. They might act in ways that perhaps are their interests and not your interests. The pitch for robo-advisory firms was perfect. We'll just look at the data, we'll crunch it into the numbers, and the robo-advisors will tell you where to invest your money. Makes sense, right? Logical. And they launched this, and it was slightly popular. I mean, some people started using it. But then, as they had more investment and more people, they said, wow, we have huge growth. We need to add something to our program. So let's add a premium level to our program, right? Multiple level. You know what the premium level had? A human advisor. So even a robo-advisory firm that was dedicated to robo-advisors said, you know what's better? Getting advice from an actual human. And why is that? Because we trust people when they are putting our interests first. But we want to hear from people. And we don't quite trust if there's not a person involved in some way. That's a basic human feeling. It's why things like this still exist. I love this at grocery stores across the UK, across Canada. There's the slow lane, the slow checkout, the exact opposite of the check out yourself and scan all the stuff in the barcodes and do it all and bag it yourself. This is, hey, if you want to slow down and have a chat, we're up for it. We're right here. We're humans. We're not always too busy to pay attention to anything, right? Sometimes we're okay to slow down and have a chat. The question is, are you okay? Do you ever make time to slow down and have a chat in an interaction like that? Or are you always rushing and going from one thing to the next? Or maybe even just ordering online so you never even have to go anywhere. And what are you missing because of that? One of the beautiful signs of hope around here has been the resurgence of craftsmanship. These amazing craftsmen who make notebooks or umbrellas or bird cages, or this picture, which is 1,000-year-old, no exaggeration, 1,000-year-old tea house in Japan. Places that exist, that keep these traditions and cultures alive. They're amazing. And we have to keep them alive by recognizing the value that they bring us. So here's the tip to predict the future. Think about what's always going to matter. We focus a lot on what's going to change, what's the new disruption, what's going to bring the next thing. We don't spend as much attention on thinking about what isn't going to change, what's going to stay the same, what's going to continue to matter, even as technology moves us forward. Not instead of, but with. Second secret, identity always shapes beliefs. What is someone's identity when they're coming in? Now, the best way to get to know people of multiple identities is to come to something like this. South by Southwest is a beautiful mix of people of all identities, and that's great. There's also ways to do that without having to come physically to one place. There's a ton of YouTube videos talking about what the home of an average German person has from a German person. There's videos about culture. There's videos about how to see the phrases that people use and what they mean by them. Someone will explain what the Indian head jiggle means to you, if you want them to. That's what YouTube videos are there for. They're great. They're really awesome at that. There's also elements of this in every culture. So when I moved to Australia and I first started interacting with people, one of the things I noticed right away is that people sit in the front seat of a taxi. It's a behavior there. Why do they do that? I started asking my friends. And they said, why wouldn't you? You're just getting a ride with this guy. You're not, usually they were guys, right, at that time. They're not any different from you. Why wouldn't you sit in the front seat and just have a conversation? That was the culture. And it taught me something about Australian culture. In the Indian culture, if you've ever been lucky enough to be at an Indian wedding, there's a tradition called the juta chupai. And this tradition involves family members from the bride's side stealing the groom's shoes and then holding them for ransom until the groom pays them back. And it's a way for the families to bond with each other. And it's fun. And because we do that, it teaches people something about the culture. The fact that when you marry in that culture, you're marrying the entire family. You're not just marrying one person. Everyone's getting married. Because now you're all together. And it's an amazing tradition. Now, it does not just for culture, like global culture, it's also for corporate culture. So about 10 years ago, I was working with Intel, they were one of my clients, and this campaign came out, and it was an amazing success, not just because of what it said about Intel, but because of what it created amongst the people who worked at Intel. And I'll play one of the ads for you.
We are Intel, sponsors of tomorrow.
When this campaign first came out, featuring Our Rock Stars Are Not Like Your Rock Stars, and a bunch of Intel employees singing that theme song, the Intel Bong, as it's called, it was a huge hit amongst the employees. I mean, other people paid attention to it, but think about the power of an ad that gets to the identity of someone who works at a place to reinforce to them why they work at that place on every level. It wasn't just TV ads. If you went into the Intel headquarters at that time, you would see posters hung up at people's cubicles that had lines like, "Your kids' kids won't think what we're working on is crazy." It said something to people. It meant something. Because it understood that their professional identity was telling the world something about themselves. And so if we could do this, if we could get better at observing culture to understand behavior, we could start to anticipate what people are going to care about in the future. That's what observing culture does. And listen, I travel enough that I've seen all of here's the do's and don'ts for Thailand, right? We've seen like those types of blog posts or those types of books. But you know what's even more effective than that? Getting off the plane and paying attention to what people do. Seeing what happens in the culture and then replicating it. Some people are in tune to be able to do that. And when you do, you can understand people and understand the culture, and you can start to see what's going to matter for them in the future. All right, secret number 3. Winners aren't the same as champions. We are really good at celebrating winners. We all want to be winners. We want to be the one winner. But the champion is a beautiful word because it means 2 different things. You can be a champion and be a winner, but champion is also a verb. You can champion someone else. You can champion something else. And there's a guy named Eric Sawinski who is quite famous in the world of marathons. He's known by every top elite marathon runner across the world because he's run in dozens of marathons, and for the first mile, he's always in first place. For the first mile, but he never finishes. His job is to be the pacer. So he has a super skill. And his super skill is that he can run the mile in an exact time, every single time. And because he's there setting the pace, all of the other elite runners know what pace they need to run at to be able to finish the marathon in the times that will get them to qualify for a world record time. Without the pacer, it's really difficult to do that. So he's not the winner, ever. But he is a champion because he stands behind them and helps them to be the best versions of themselves. Now, there are historical examples of this too. Albert Einstein is a great example of a famous scientist that we remember for all of his achievements. But if you think back to the beginning, and if you know a little bit about his story, when he wrote his special theory of relativity, he wasn't a working scientist. He was a patent clerk, an unknown patent clerk. So think about the time, or any time really, of someone who's not in the industry, who's an unknown, writing a theory that says to everyone who is an expert in that industry that everything they're doing might actually be wrong. What is the reaction going to be from that industry? Is it going to be option 1, oh, thank you for telling us how wrong we are, even though you're not a professional in this industry. We're going to totally listen to what you have to say. Or is it option B, you're totally crazy. You can't be right. And they dismiss it. Usually, it's option B. So why was it that Einstein's special theory of relativity was actually recognized? Well, it turns out there's one person who Einstein sent it to that decided that it wasn't crazy. And that person was Max Planck. And Max Planck knew everyone in the establishment. And he said, this is worth paying attention to. You need to pay attention to this person and this theory. And Max Planck was the one who helped Einstein get recognized and helped him get his first professorship. He's the one whose shoulders Einstein was able to stand on. And when I've shared this story before, it comes with a question that I want to pose for all of you right now, which is, who's your Max Planck? Who's the person that you need to be able to see your thing, whatever that is, or your potential, and elevate it? And the next question is, could you be that Max Planck for someone else? And I'll give you a perfect example of that. So the movie The Greatest Showman is a huge hit, but it almost didn't get made. Because when they were trying to get it made and get the funding for it, people weren't sure that it could take off because it wasn't a recognized platform. It wasn't a recognized musical about a story people knew. It was totally new, totally different. So they had an audition where they brought all the executives together and they brought all the cast members together and they sang the songs from the musical. And there was one song that was going to be the #1 hit song from that musical. And if you've seen the show, it's called This Is Me. And the artist who was performing that song, Kiala Settle, was ready to do it, but she was feeling a little shy, a little apprehensive. So during this audition, she's kind of standing behind this podium and like a music stand in front of her, and she's reluctant to step out. And they talked about it with the director. They talked about it before. They said, look, this is your moment. You gotta like step into it and be the star because this song is going to make you that star. And she's just not feeling it. And in this rehearsal, something magical happens. And it happens because of one guy in a hoodie in the ensemble cast. So I want to play this clip for you and watch what this one guy does.
With a shower's words when
Did you see what happened in that moment when he did his part? And then she turns around and the entire energy changes. I mean, I've seen that clip many times and I still get goosebumps every time I watch it. And the movie gets made. But imagine, like, what would it be like if all of us could be that guy on that chair for someone at some point? What if we chose to try and be that person for someone? What could that create if they felt that type of energy from us standing behind them? And it turns out that this is a really effective way to try and anticipate what's going to come next also. Because you focus on the influencers who are making these things happen. And you try and see what work they're doing and who they're building up to get to that next level. And you can anticipate what's going to matter next as a result. All right, secret number 4. Easy, obvious answers are often a distraction. In 1898, a writer named Morgan Robertson published a book that was originally titled Futility, and it was about a shipwreck. And in this book, there was a ship called the Titan that hit an iceberg and sank because there were not enough lifeboats on that ship. Exactly 14 years later, a ship called the Titanic hit an iceberg and sank, and many people lost their lives because there was not enough lifeboats. So people put these pieces together and said, this guy somehow predicted it. In fact, they republished the book, and they called it not Futility, but The Wreck of the Titan, which is a bit insensitive, I mean, let's be honest, right? After the Titanic crash. But the opportunity was to make a myth out of this thing, make a legend out of it, right? And if you look back at that, there's still blog posts talking about how this person knew it was going to happen. Luckily, there's also some people who look at some historical data to see exactly why was it that he was able to do what he did. And it turns out that the company behind the Titanic had launched 4 different ships before that, called the Britannic, the Teutonic, the Majestic, and the Gigantic. Now, you could postulate what the next ship would be, and Morgan Robertson did in fact do that. However, if he named it the Titanic, he might get into legal trouble, so he changed it a little to the Titan. And number 2, it was common for these ships to have too few lifeboats because they didn't think they could sink. And there were no regulations around that at that time, so they put on as many lifeboats as they thought they could, but they didn't have enough for every passenger. That was commonplace. And the third thing, the most damning thing, is that the passage that these ships would go through had so many icebergs, it was known as Iceberg Alley. It was a frequent occurrence for there to be icebergs along the path that these ships took. Now, when you know these 3 facts, it doesn't exactly seem like Morgan Robertson was the Swami of the future that he was made out to be, does it? It seems like maybe he just put the pieces together based on what things were out there to write a story that eventually ended up resembling reality because he had the right data points. Now, there's a psychological principle here. It's called the Texas sharpshooter fallacy. Perfect, since we're here in Texas, right? And the Texas sharpshooter fallacy says that if you find data that coalesces around a certain point and then you make the point afterwards for what that data means, you are not really indicating truth. You are instead assigning meaning where no meaning actually exists. And that is something that humans are very good at, doing that, and assigning meaning where no meaning exists. So we have to collectively get better. If we're going to be able to anticipate the future, we have to be able to anticipate and uncover the deeper meaning, the meaning underneath what the surface level is. We can't go for the obvious, easy answer. And we can't go for the shiny thing because we're missing something. And this is a challenge for all of us. We have to be able to go deeper than that. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to see what really, truly matters. All right, secret number 5. People and experiences should surprise you. If you're walking through the world and you know everything that's going to happen and you know exactly how it's going to happen and you see something and you're like, yep, that's exactly what I thought, you are not challenging yourself to see something different. And that is a tragedy. Because when you do challenge yourself, you see opportunity. There's a dancer named Usha Jay that released a series of viral videos that did exactly this by challenging what people thought they were going to see. Not what you expect to see, but it works. And by the way, when I share the link afterwards, I'll share links to all the videos that I'm sharing with you as well, so you can watch the full videos for any of you who want to watch those. But it's interesting because we see ourselves in a certain way, right? If I were to ask you with a quick show of hands, right, if you had to describe yourself with one of these 2 words, how many of you would say that you describe yourself with the word traveler? Okay? How many of you would say you describe yourself with the word tourist? Okay? So whichever one you choose, that word means something to you, right? Based on how you interpreted it. And there are plenty of memes out there about how people interpret what the word tourist versus the word traveler means, right? And I'm not trying to criticize you for choosing one versus the other, because there's a lot of baggage that goes into, no pun intended, right? Baggage for traveling. There's a lot of stuff that goes into this idea of being a tourist or a traveler. But what's interesting is when we think of how we travel, we all have notions that we go into. There was a moment about almost 10 years ago when I went on a cruise with my family. And I'm not a big fan of cruises. I like to explore places, and I feel like on a cruise I'm kind of stuck in one place. And this particular cruise was not the sort of cruise that would likely make me a fan of cruises. It was super crowded, there was no space to move around, and it was just, you had one meal option, and everybody did the same thing, and there was no escape. We were on that boat, from wherever we started from to where we ended. But I remember there was a moment when I was on this cruise and I was standing near the pool where my kids were playing in the pool, and it was one of those kind of pools where nobody was swimming because everyone was trying to just, jumping up and down because that's all you had space for in this pool. And the pool was basically ocean water dumped into a, thing. So it was like salt water also, which I didn't expect, but I guess that's how they do it on a lot of cruises, right? So we're like stuck and they're bobbing around up and down. And I'm like, man, I guess they're having fun, but this doesn't look fun to me. And as I'm watching that, in the corner that apparently was for dads to be watching. There were a few other dads there. And one of the other dads was this like big guy, like 6'3", and he was just watching his kids. And I just kind of looked over and I saw he had tears in his eyes. And I kind of, when you see somebody having an unusual reaction to something, you kind of you look for a second. And then I was like, hey, man, are you okay? What's going on? And he looks at me and he says, this is the first vacation I've been able to take my kids on in 5 years. And they've wanted to go somewhere, and this was the only thing that we could really do, that we could afford and that fit into our time frame and that was doable. And here's a guy who's watching his kids have the time of their lives in an experience that I'm just sitting there criticizing for days in a row in my head because it's not what I thought it should be. And in that moment, I realized that I was missing something. This was my problem. I was the problem. It was me. Because I wasn't allowing this experience to be what it was. I was just criticizing it in my head. And I think we've all been in moments like that probably, right? Where it's not something that we expected, and so we criticize it, and we don't appreciate it. And then we see someone else who's just having a great time, who's thinking differently than we are. And, it makes us feel like crap, and I felt like crap, right? But also, it teaches us something. And it was a lesson I never forgot. That no matter where I go, I gotta be happy where I am. If I'm gonna spend my whole time criticizing where I am, what kind of experience is that gonna be? And what kind of life is that gonna be too? So we all have that chance. If we can seek out these moments of wonder, moments of awe, even when they don't seem to exist in a place, we give ourselves the gift. We give ourselves the gift of being able to see something that we didn't see before. And by the way, that's super useful for imagining what the future is going to be too. Because when you can seek out those moments, you start to see the things that other people don't see. I often say, non-obvious thinkers, they see what others miss. And this is one of the ways to be able to do that, to see what others miss. Secret number 6, meaning comes from intersections. Instead of seeing just one thing or seeing people in one way, see the intersections between them. In my world of marketing that I spent many years working in, it used to frustrate me to no end that we would use demographics, which are the most idiotic way to try and describe a target audience. Because you end up with this, right? Which has been a meme online for a long time, and it should be, because it demonstrates the stupidest thing that marketers do, which is we just take these data points and we're like, well, these two people must be the same. Right? When clearly they're not. But we don't appreciate that because we see the labels and we think that's what describes someone. And sometimes there's some really powerful examples of why we shouldn't do that. And I'll play one of the most powerful that I've seen ever for you right now. it's such a powerful reminder of how we should treat each other, how we shouldn't let the labels that get assigned to us be the things that we remember. And that experience of having that type of community is one of the reasons why I really love being here in Austin at South by Southwest. And for the last several years, some of you have been participants in something that we've hosted called the Non-Obvious 7-Minute Meetup. And what we do is we bring people together and we give them these crazy, non-obvious glasses. And the reason we bring people together is because we ask them to share something non-obvious about themselves with one another. And the goal of doing that is to try and foster these connections between people that aren't based on your job title or your career or the data points that we typically share, and the reason why when we go to networking events, it's such a drain, it's such a drag, because it's really tough. And instead, we ask people what's something non-obvious about you, and they share it, and then we get them together to share those things with one another, and people have deeper bonding connections as a result. And we've seen it happen over and over again. We did it at South by Southwest in Sydney, and we had an amazing experience. And there was a moment there, actually, that really got me thinking about this and the power of it. Because it wasn't so much about that, or even about the glasses, because the glasses are meant to be the visual reminder that, oh, somebody else has been to that, so now you have a reason to talk to one another, right? That doesn't feel awkward. Oh, you have the glasses. What's something non-obvious about you? But what was interesting was I went to this event in Sydney, and I spoke, and we did our 7-minute meetup. And there was a young guy that I met there, and he came up to me and he said, look, I love your 7-minute meetup. I made some great connections. I also have this startup idea that I'm working on, and I'd love to tell you about it. I said, great. Will you walk with me? Because I'm going to another event. So he was walking with me, and I met a friend of mine, Amy, who's here, like somewhere. Yeah, there you are. She was on stage earlier today. We were hanging out, walking together, and then we met somebody else, and I was like, oh, we met, and this, he was with us. I'm like, okay, I'll introduce him to these people, and then we met somebody else, and pretty soon we decided that we had to go and see this session. So I'm like, hey, come with us. We'll see this session. So we sat in this session, and this poor guy's sitting in the session now, waiting still. The session's 45 minutes long. He's still sitting. Credit to him, right? He's still sitting there, hanging out. And then we go and meet some other people. Then finally, it's been 2 hours, right? And I'm like, okay, yeah, tell me about the thing, but I got to go to this dinner. So you got 1 minute, right? So he gives me his pitch in 1 minute. And afterwards, later that night, I was thinking, I was kind of not very nice. I took him around with us all over the place. I didn't really listen to I made him wait for a long time to tell me his 1 minute pitch. And even when he finally had a chance to, he didn't really get much time. But the day after, I got a LinkedIn message from him, and he said, I just wanted to say thank you. Because during that 2 hours, we went everywhere, and every place that we went to, you introduced me as your friend. And I felt that. And I thought to myself, I didn't think about that when I did it. I just introduced him like my friend, because we just met and he's my friend. But I realized that that was what we created in this moment. A moment where we could make these fast friends and then introduce them to other people. And that was what was really important to him. And that was what's really important to all of us. Not that I take 3 minutes to listen to his pitch. That was important too, right? But what was really important was the connection that we created. And that's the point of why we do so many of these. And when we do them, the reason they work is because we encourage people to start with curiosity. You actually have to care about the answer that you get back when someone says, what's something non-obvious about you, and then they tell you. Sounds pretty basic, but it makes a huge difference. You gotta care. And that's the reason it works. And when you start with that curiosity in your interactions, guess what happens to your understanding of what's coming next and what's going on in the world? That also benefits. That is something futurists do all the time. They start with curiosity to follow a behavior, to follow something that's happening, to follow a technology, and then see what's going to happen next. It's an essential skill to being a futurist. 7th secret. Undiscovery can be better than discovery. So what's undiscovery? What does that mean? I'm going to share an image with you, and I want you to shout out what you see. Just shout it out. What do you see? Duck. I heard duck. What else? What else? Bunny. Rabbit. Yes, rabbit. Okay, so if you saw the duck, I want you to see the rabbit. And if you saw the rabbit or the bunny, I want you to see the duck. Okay? Try hard to see both of them. All right? After about 5 seconds, Some people it takes a little longer. Everyone's able to see both. And this is quite an old image. In fact, I know that it's over 100 years old because I didn't have to pay any licensing for it. But it's been an optical illusion for a long time. And the question that I started thinking the first time I saw it was, who's right? Which one is it? Is it a duck? Is it a rabbit? Or is it both? And how many times in our lives or in our interactions do we have a moment where we allow two things that seem to be conflicting to both be true? Not very many. So this is the power of what some people call undiscovery. So in 1876, there was an island off the coast of Australia called Sandy Island that's been on maps since that time, was on Google Maps since that time, until about 10 years ago, when someone in Australia said, you know what, let's go visit this island, and figured out it doesn't exist. They undiscovered Sandy Island. And Google Maps removed it from the map, and Sandy Island no longer is officially on the maps, although if you look at old maps, it's still there, because people thought it was a real island, and everyone just copied the map from before, which you may or may not identify with if you ever copy a Word document or a PowerPoint from the previous one, right? They basically did that with the maps. And the first time I read this story, I thought to myself, in my lifetime, where I thought the Earth was pretty well mapped, something that we thought existed can be undiscovered, then we really are living in an amazing time. Because it's not about the undiscovery of an island that really intrigued me. What it's about is the chance that I could rethink that assumption, that that map had everything that had been discovered, and yet, here's an island that was undiscovered because it didn't exist in the first place. And it gave me permission to be thinking about the fact that maybe the assumptions I'm making, oh, that's a duck, oh, that's a rabbit, maybe there's another side to seeing that. And maybe I could work a little harder at finding and seeing that other side. Rethink your assumptions. So I promised you one final slide that has a recap of everything. And this is the one. I'm sorry, I really tried to make the text as large as I possibly could, but I had to get all 7 of them on one slide. So that was the challenge, and I had to do it. So this is the one slide, and like I said, I'm going to give you a QR code in a second where you can download the slides. Well, an email will be sent to you with the slides because we don't have them up quite yet. You know how it goes. So we'll send you a follow-up and you'll get them. So you won't get them right away, but you do have the 7 secrets right away. And on that same link, you'll also find the locations for several of our meetups that are happening over the next few days. So if you are able to join, yes, they do in fact happen over 7 minutes, but you can stay longer, or you can just squeeze it in because I know how busy it is to be here. So this is the QR code that you can scan, and you just have to put your email address in there, and then you'll get access to all of the slides, all of the schedule, everything like that straight from there. And I think it's going to be a really amazing experience for you to be at one of these things. But more importantly, I hope that it's a chance for us to connect. Because what I've been sharing with you are some of the biggest secrets that I have uncovered as a futurist for understanding people. But I think that if you can learn to understand people and be better at that, you're also going to be better at predicting the future. And that is what we should all be trying for. Thank you so much.